Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. Today's guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast is Max Strom. Max started out as a college American football player and made his money in his early years as the lead singer of a signed rock band. Being almost 2 meters tall and well built, he was not an obvious candidate for yoga. But one day he wandered through the doors of Yoga Works in LA, where he now worked as a professional writer for TV and film. He's immediately drawn to yoga at the rather late age of 38. At first he started with Iyengar yoga and then moved to Ashtanga. He practiced under the guidance of Chuck and Matty. However, it was Dina Kingsburg, a recent podcast guest, who came to cover for them on one of their trips to India, that really made the most lasting impression. Dina emphasized the power of breathing in her teaching. This had a huge effect on Max, who has developed the breathing aspects shared by all holistic modalities as the core of his teaching. Max's belief is that the breath is the quickest and most effective way to make contact with and resolve old traumas and their current manifestations as anxiety or depression. In this podcast, we talk a lot about the power of breath practice to resolve painful emotional states and the importance of understanding the tool of yoga in a more pragmatic sense in order to learn how to grieve and also be there for those around us who are suffering. Max has taught in this way for many years around the world with remarkable success, not only in the yoga studio, but with company executives in the boardroom. Indeed, he has also given a fantastic TED talk on his remarkable ability to facilitate this healing. Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, Max.
Thank you for inviting me, Adam. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you. You just want to give us like a brief background of your journey with yoga and meditation and kind of how you came to be here today?
Well, the path is quite an unusual one and certainly not in a straight line. I started having some of the big questions of life came to me when I was 15 years old. So at 15, I became an avid reader of philosophy and comparative religions and so on. This was not that popular to be in high school. I was basically reading college level comparative religion at 15, and I had no friends who were interested in that sort of thing. So I was considered quite odd, I suppose. I was in that way. I discovered meditation at that point, which I just figured out how to do on my own. I would just go up into the wilderness. I lived right on the edge of a wilderness and sit in nature and meditate. And then the next practice I discovered was I happened to work at a place that had a very good Qigong teacher, Bakwa and Qigong. And so I practiced with him for a couple of years, 2 years, I think, maybe 3. And then he moved away and there was no one to replace him. So my practice petered out at that time because I was involved in music. I was a rock singer and band leader. I had 2 records out in the early 80s. And
what was the band? I couldn't find it.
I'm glad. Yeah. No, I wouldn't mind if you thought it. I really loved being in the music business overall. I loved it being in music. I didn't love being in the music business. The business is rough. Yeah. But I pretty much got out of practice, fell out of my practice by being in that world. And then I took a year off to write a screenplay at some point. And that was when I was 30 years old. Mm-hmm. That's right, 29, 30. And there was a lot of interest in my screenplay. And I was really tired of living in semi-poverty as a musician. And so I decided to switch genres, basically. And I stopped being a professional musician and became a professional screenwriter. And I made a living at that for about 8 years. Not a great living, but I had about 8 things produced and released. And during that time, the long story short is I moved to Santa Monica, California, and I was 4 blocks away from Yoga Works. And Yoga Works at that time was one room. The entire Yoga Works was one room, and Chuck was just building, one of the owners was just building the second room. So within a couple of months, there was a second room. So I was practicing there in the fairly early days of that. So that was 91, I think the beginning of 91. January 91 when I started.
Oh, wow.
And so I started practicing there, and it really just changed my life. I practiced mostly Iyengar style in those days.
Who are you practicing with? Because they had a lot of good teachers there, didn't they? Iyengar as well, like Eric Schiffman and people like that.
Yeah, I practiced with Stephen Friedman, who at that time was one of their main Iyengar teachers. Very quirky guy, but a very excellent teacher. Well, we were all quirky, I guess, all the yoga teachers. And Eric Schiffman as well, I practiced with. Those two are the main ones for a little while. And then after about a year, I started practicing 6 days a week. And it was great because as a writer, I could write till about 4 o'clock and then walk 4 blocks and walk into this yoga center where I had a monthly pass. So it was a really good way to end the day. And it was also a social outlet for me. You sit in a room by yourself, driving yourself mad, trying to write. It's really nice to go into a community. And so then I discovered Ashtanga yoga, and I started practicing. I dropped everything else, started practicing Ashtanga yoga 6 days a week. That was in 93.
Right, 93. And what was Chuck teaching you?
No, Chuck taught in the morning.
Oh, yeah, he did.
I tried to get up in the morning. I did get up in the morning 2 or 3 times. I just thought, I'm already one of the stiffest guys here. I started off as an extremely stiff person.
Because you started yoga late, right? You started yoga later in life.
Yeah, 35 years old is when I started.
Right.
35. So by this time, I'm
30. It's not old, but these days probably taken as old to most people these days.
I was one of the oldest people in the Ashtanga group, that's for sure. And I thought, I'm already this stiff, and I'm even stiffer in the morning. I'm just not a morning get up and do it in the morning person. I like doing it at the end of the day. So I practiced primarily with Matty. But what really got me interested in Ashtanga was not practicing with her, but with a visiting teacher. Chuck and Matty went on a trip to India to practice with their teacher, Pattabhi Joyce. And so they had a guest teacher for 3 months named Dina Kingsburg.
That was when I just did Dina on the podcast, the last podcast, one of the last ones. And she mentioned coming to Yoga Works and teach. That was her first kind of proper teaching gig, as it were, I think.
It was. Yeah. She was 27.
That's funny, isn't it?
And I really liked her as a teacher very much. And she influenced me a great deal. She was the first teacher I found of all of them that brought a sense of essence to the practice of we're doing something besides postures here.
Well, you'll be pleased to know she's still very much on the same track. Yeah,
I'm sure she is.
Yeah.
And so for that 3 months, I was really flying high as a kite. I just loved the practice. And then she went back to Australia, and then Matty was there, and they're very different. It was very hard for me to get used to her personality, which is entirely different, like almost diametrically opposed.
But Matty, she's a kind of, or she was quite abrupt, wasn't she? She used to scream at me across the room, like, "Oh, what are you doing?" In the nicest possible way, But she was tough, yeah.
And then Dina left, and I practiced with Matty for a couple of months, and then Pattabhi Joyce arrived. So he was at that time not very well known in America. So he taught 3 classes a day, beginning primary series, which is what I took. Primary series, and then I think second series. And so some of the well-known teachers at that time came to assist him. So Pattabhi Joyce was teaching, and of course Chuck assisted, Richard Freeman, Eddie Stern, who was 23 at that time. He was really just a kid, happy-go-lucky kid. And I really adored him. At 23, he was really one of the best adjusters already.
Huh.
Yeah, he was remarkable. And who else? I think Tim Miller came for a few days as well, which came up from his studio. So obviously the assistants were quite good. And that was pretty brutal, practicing for 2 hours a day with Patabi Joyce for 1 month, I think it was.
Well, they were all assisting, they were all adjusting you in this class.
Yeah, it'd be 2 a day, and then 2 days later, someone else would come.
That's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like an all-star team, and you did that, and you went through that. So you did all the classes with them like that.
Yeah, it was about 1 month. And then I continued on with Matty, and then they left. Chuck and Matty left again, and Dina came back again for a few months, and so I was happy in practicing with her again.
Okay.
But
I didn't know you had such a background with Ashtanga. I mean, it wasn't, certainly the interesting thing is I didn't get you in the podcast, feeling you had an Ashtanga connection, but you have a huge Ashtanga connection there. That's amazing.
Well, I practiced Ashtanga, I would say, pretty ardently for 2.5 years.
Right.
And then I backed away from it. So basically, my knees started hurting all the time because in those days, in those days, as you remember, you didn't use props. There were no props, and it was a little more hardcore. And I remember complaining to Chuck and Matty one time. They were sitting together. I told them about my knees. I said, when I wake up in the morning, I walk down the stairs, I think I'm going to fall sometimes because my knees are so unstable. Can I take out these 2 positions because they're really hurting my knees? And they said, no. And I said, well, that's a problem. And I really thought about it. And I really realized at some point, I don't mean to offend anybody, I realized this is very cult-like behavior because I had bought into this system that even upon injury would not allow me to modify it to protect my own knees. And I talked to them again about it, and they just said, no, you can't do it. You can stop before this one posture. And so I decided to practice at home for a while.
What a shame. I mean, the other thing is that I know that Matty and Chuck latterly, did amend a great deal, right? But
yes.
I think what people talk about, and one reason I started the podcast is I'm talking about tradition. People kind of think it was one thing, but obviously this is a thing which has changed and amended over time. And, when you started and when I started, it was like, well, if you couldn't get into the posture, then basically you were kind of manhandled to such a degree that maybe you could fulfill the demands of the shape roughly, regardless of what happened to you within that manhandling, And if you couldn't do it, then that was it, like you stopped there, nothing else.
That's right.
But it's changed and it's amended, But unfortunately, you never got that.
No, and I mean, Baddha Konasana was hard for me when I started yoga. My knees were way up in the air, my shoulders, So of course, my hips weren't open enough to do Janu Sirsasana C. I was just twisting my knee every day.
But you were an American football player, right?
Yes, just in school though, not professional.
College, right. You're quite big built. I mean, if people don't know you, you're not the typical Ashtanga kind of body. I don't think you're right. Yeah.
No, I'm 6'5".
6'5".
Yeah, maybe a little more, close to 2 meters, and broad-shouldered. Yeah, I look more like a football player than a classic yoga practitioner. So I started practicing at home and basically removed the postures that were destroying my knees out and put in more Iyengar style beginner level postures for those. And then, so my knees started healing, and I liked practicing at home, and friends would come over and practice with me. And then eventually I started teaching that sequence. So basically I started teaching a modified Ashtanga practice.
Right. Before we spend the whole time on kind of, reminiscing about Ashtanga, I want to get into your actual work. So you started doing with the Ashtanga and the Iyengar, and then you started teaching kind of Hatha yoga, just a more a kind of, generalized system of yoga. Is that right?
What I started teaching was a modified primary series.
Right. And then how did it switch, and why did it switch to what you're most known for today, which is the breath work primarily in the, the more meditative aspects?
Well, let's see. I started with Qigong, as I said. So I had several years of a slow moving, standing breathing practice already under my belt, and so I knew some of the benefits already. Then Dina was very good at teaching of a really sophisticated Ujjayi breathing. So she helped me a lot with that. And I found that when I really breathed well for the first year of my practice, which is before I met Dina, but when I did ocean breathing, what I call it now ocean breathing, really well, that I would become emotional at the end of every practice, that I would be lying in the total relaxation with tears running down my face. And I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until I met Dina over a year later that I said, do you know what this is about? And she said, it's old grief that you've stored in your body and you're releasing it. And this became very interesting to me. And so I became very passionate about breathing and how it made me feel and sleep better and smile more. And my friends started noticing that I seemed happier. I mean, friends outside of yoga who didn't know anything about it noticed that I seemed friendlier, happier, less reactive. So it was changing, I wouldn't say it's changing my personality, but it was healing my personality, healing my psychology. So I really became a big believer in that. So when I started teaching, I became known as the guy at Yoga Works that would make you breathe, quote unquote. I would stop the class if they weren't breathing well and start them again. And then I would see this phenomenon. I would see students getting emotional in a class, and I'm like, oh, there's really something to this.
Yeah.
And it's worth dedicating more time to. That's how it started.
Okay. And how does that progress? Like, you went to, I read on some interview, I think it was a Yoga Journal interview actually, you kind of went to India and you were kind of, I don't know whether you were ever going to go to Pune or Mysore, but you ended up kind of going to all the holy cities and having quite an experience there, right? That kind of was pivotal in a kind of the matrix of what you're doing now.
That was the year 2000 when I went to India. So that's quite a bit after. I'd been teaching for about 5 years at that point.
Right.
So by that time, I was not interested in meeting Iyengar at all because I had seen film footage of him, the way he taught, and I thought he was a very rude person. And to be honest, and I don't believe, and I teach this in my teacher trainings, I don't believe in teaching using shame. I don't think we should be shaming people.
Yeah.
And Patabi Joyce, by that time, I was no longer interested in practicing Ashtanga, pure Ashtanga. So I thought, if I go to Patabi Joyce, I'm going to ruin my knees. I'm not going to do that. So I just went on basically a pilgrimage, and the most holy people I met really were completely unknown. One was a street beggar, and one was selling trinkets in the Himalayas in Nepal. Those are the people that really had a lifelong impact on me.
Really?
Yeah, they were just extraordinary. And I could tell you stories about them, a story about each of them. But India affected me. But I really, I would say philosophically, align more with the Sufis, I would say. And particularly the Sufis from West India, who were heavily influenced by Vedanta yoga and also a little bit by Islam, but they weren't Islamic Sufis by any means. And in particular, the teacher Hazrat Inayat Khan, who maybe you've read him, he died in 1929. Obviously, never met him. I'm not that old. But I really love the way they are non-dogmatic. They refer to God as the friend or the beloved. They don't personify God. And that it's really about your spiritual experience rather than spiritual dogma. So they really experiential knowledge rather than academic knowledge. And so it's sort of bhakti and that it's devotional, but it's not to a statue or a photo of someone or a guru. It's more let's see, what was that term? The guru within, I forget what they call that. There's a term for that. Satguru, right? Satguru is the guru inside you, the great guru inside you. I think it's one of the terms for it. And so I would say that's more how I thought. That was more my experience and ethos in spirituality. And then breath was second to that, followed by meditation, followed by asana, in that order priority.
I think I've heard you saying that you can't meditate before you understood the breath and kind of done some work with the breath, right? Or at least the breath is the kind of gateway to it, right?
Yeah. The second thing you said, I didn't say you have to do it first, but I said that if you're having trouble meditating,
yes, something like that. Yeah.
Then go back to breathing, because it'll quiet your mind enough that you can meditate.
There's Chinese whispers. Before you know it, they'll say, well, Max Strom says, you can't meditate before you've done pranayama and 10 years of Ashtanga training.
Exactly.
No, we're not that famous yet. So who was your teacher in the breathing? And is it, and just giving a background of how I've seen stuff you've taught on breathing, but it's not the classical pranayama, is it? It's much more immediately graspable and pragmatic. I mean, you're well known for teaching to, kind of businesses and well-known, CEOs and, like on a more of a, kind of mass dissemination of this. It's not, held within the yoga sphere on its own, which is quite nice.
That's right, Adam. Well,
yeah.
Where do I start?
I'll ask a few questions in one go, I suppose. Probably start with what you learned in your background in learning the breathing and how you then made it, perhaps amended it towards a pragmatic approach that everyone could take on, that you wouldn't necessarily say to a CEO, start doing Nadi Shodhana,
Right, okay.
Right? They wouldn't understand it,
All right, so I did the Qigong for a few years, and then I really was into a sophisticated level of Ujjayi Pranayama. And when I say that, I mean people would put their mats next to me so that I would guide them through breathing when I practiced as a student in the class. I was known for that. And then when I started teaching, I did teach some of the classical Nadi Shodhana, the breath of fire type of exercises. And I found them useful, but not life-changing. And then I started practicing some Sufi teachers who had other types of breathing practices that I hadn't learned in yoga. And I found them more powerful. And also, when I was teaching people to breathe, I found that people in Los Angeles in 1995, when I first started teaching, January 1995, were very interested in it. And part of the problem is the way we taught it. And I know that now, but at that time I didn't. I thought, why wouldn't you do this? This is when a teacher tells you to do something, just do it. But the problem is that's how we taught breathing. That's how everybody who taught breathing in LA taught it. This is what we do. Do this. As opposed to, this is why we do it. It was just more tradition. You do it because of tradition. And if that's not a motivating factor, it's not very inspiring. So
no. But I think another thing, just as an addendum there, is I think what I noticed at the start is no one was interested in pranayama when I started, like probably in late 90s, I guess. And I think it's a context. It's building a context up around it as well, right?
Yes.
Because now, I mean, we do different workshops here and we host different workshops, and the pranayama is really, really popular. So, and it wasn't them. So I think it is something that people are more interested in, or leading on to my next question, people really need it more than ever,
People do need it more than ever, but they need it then as well, especially in Los Angeles.
Right.
So I finally figured out that, let's put it this way, if I were a physiotherapist and you came to me and you said, I have a problem with my shoulder, I said, I can help you with that. You'd say, great. Then you say, what do you want me to do? And I'd say, do this. But in yoga, it's not like that. You just show up and they say, we're going to do a bunch of stuff. Why? Because it's tradition. I'm not going to teach you how to breathe. If you come to me and you say, I have anxiety, I'm not going to say, I'm going to teach you to breathe because it's tradition. I'm going to teach you to breathe as a therapy for your anxiety. And it'll make you feel better in the next 10 minutes, not someday. And that gets people's attention. So if I go into a corporation, for example, they're looking at their watches when I arrive, like, really, you brought this guy in to teach us to breathe? What is this? Have you lost your mind? And I say, I understand it's counterintuitive. Give me 10 minutes of your time, and I guarantee you'll feel different and better. And they would feel better in 10 minutes. And then they'd have the attitude, okay, what else do you have? We feel better right now.
Okay, and what do you teach them then? What is it? I mean, tell me.
I teach them first. I teach them ocean breathing. But going back to 1995, when I first started teaching my classes, my modified or stronger classes, I realized, okay, this is not holding their attention, the breathing part. They give up after a couple of minutes. How could I fix that? I'm a bit of an inventor. I like to problem solve. So I had just read an article that said, if you want human beings to pay closer attention, have them stand rather than sit. That's one thing. And I thought, well, in Qigong, we stood and we moved our arms. What would happen then? And then I saw a documentary where they were resuscitating. It was a kitten. It was like a leopard or a lion kitten. I can't remember, a cub. And they moved their arms out and back to make them breathe. It's like giving mouth to mouth, so to speak. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. Well, what if we did some basic Qigong arm movement? Maybe that's a key to keep interest. So I had everybody stand up one day. We took horse stance, where it looks like you're standing on a horse with knees bent. And we did these simple arm movements doing the ocean breathing, and it held their attention 15, 20 minutes, no problem. And they learned.
And they agreed to do this with you?
Yeah.
In the boardroom? I'm just trying to get
No, I'm talking the first classes back at Yoga Works now.
Okay, right.
So, but yes, also in the boardroom, they will do that. They will stand up and they will do it with me. And in conferences, hundreds of people will stand up and do this with me. And they feel better right away. Sometimes they will sit down, their face will go in their hands, and they'll start weeping. Because we have so much stress, so much anxiety. People are so lost that's all just packed beneath the surface. It's pushed down. And the breath accesses your psychology. It accesses your subconscious, as they say. So, of course, anything that's trapped is just released. And so this is what I became known for. But I don't travel the world to teach people to cry, just to cry. And I want to have them to cry, and then I leave. What I aim to do is help people who have post-traumatic stress to have post-traumatic freedom. So in other words, after working with me, you don't have anxiety anymore. You don't have panic attacks anymore.
Wow. That's if you don't mind me saying, that's quite a claim. I mean, that's, you could market that, I mean, you're putting big business out, big pharma out of business there, aren't you?
What's that?
You're putting big pharma out of business there,
That's right.
I mean, how many? What? I mean, you probably know better than I. How proportions of people are antidepressants and etc. right now? It's got to be pretty high.
Well, in the Guardian UK in April 2018, they released the UK's biggest mental health study they had ever done. I think it was 9,000 people that the study was done on. Did you read that?
No.
That's fantastic. Take a look. Just Google Guardian UK 2018 mental health, and the article would come up. And the statistics that they came up with were staggering. For example, 30% of the people they interviewed had considered suicide in the last year.
30%?
30%.
What, so, actually? Or just like, it's not going to...
Contemplating.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. 1 out of 6 were self-harming.
Right.
Girls 14 years old, it's 1 out of 4 were self-harming, et cetera, et cetera. So we were in trouble with anxiety and depression before COVID hit. Now, since COVID, it's much worse.
I'm sure it is. I mean, honestly, I got into yoga, and it's no secret, I don't think by now. I was doing philosophy at university, and I ended up going to the psychologist, or we call a counselor or whatever, and quickly after that they just whacked me on antidepressants, and I spent a year on them or something. It's bloody hard to get off them, and they make you feel a lot worse,
Yes.
I've never been the same since. But no, I mean, terrible. And yeah, really, I've been on a crusade against generally, I mean, in all fairness, at a certain point, I feel that there's a relevance if someone is really in the cusp. But I think that they just handed out indiscriminately, and you never deal with the problem. But I mean, after that little waffle of mine, I wanted to ask you, you're having these, you're having these cathartic feelings, which, to be honest, I never really had with yoga so much. It stabilized my anxiety rather than kind of cleansed it. Maybe I'm still waiting for this this purge. I hope not. But if you're having this sense of catharsis in the breathing, and you say you don't want to let people leave crying, or just leave with them crying, you've got all this stuff come up. Then what do you do with it? I mean, for example, my mother, I tried to teach breathing once, and she said she felt worse. She felt more panicky when she was asked to focus on her breath than when she was just doing nothing at all. Yeah.
Well, what happens is people who have a really intense anxiety is they start to do breath work and their emotions start to come up. But what a panic attack actually is you trying to push the emotions down. The panic doesn't come up. The emotions come up. That scares them because they're afraid of their own emotions. So they try to push them down. And if you've ever watched someone have a panic attack or had one yourself, you know that people don't cry during a panic attack. They might cry later, but not during, because they're crushing their feelings. They're just pushing them down. One of the things I tell people is when you feel a panic attack coming on is allow yourself to cry. Try to make yourself cry, and the panic attack will stop immediately.
That's really, really quite interesting. Having, and kind of, having been in that experience in my early 20s. I never really thought of it that way. So the emotion comes up, and then what do you do with it then? When you're feeling that emotion, are there breath works to deal with that emotion? Or, I mean, I suppose I'm trying to prod you to talk about your ideas on grief and how to grieve, because you do have some more practical ideas on that.
I do. Grief is a part of my work because we don't know how to grieve, and we are completely illiterate when it comes to grieving. So I'll give you an example. I was in Amsterdam about a year ago doing a big conference there, a well-being conference called the Inner Peace Conference, a really beautiful event. There were about 400 people in the room, and I said, in the middle of my talk about this, I said, please raise your hand if you've ever learned CPR at some point in your life. Do you call CPR in the UK?
No, I'm just laughing because I've heard that. I like the story. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. CPR, resuscitation.
Resuscitation.
Yeah.
And I think in Holland, in Dutch, they call it heart massage. Okay, so
poetic.
75% of their people raised their hand. So 75% had learned CPR at some point in their life. Good, hands down. Now raise your hand if when you were a child or a young adult, you were taught in a positive way how to deal with your emotions, and especially grief, or the grief of others. And in this entire room, one arm went up in the air. One. And so what I said was, then we know what to do if someone's heart stops, but we have no idea what to do if someone's heart breaks. None. We have no idea. We were taught nothing, just absolutely nothing. And so we're going along through life where we have one crisis after the other, and we don't know what to do.
Generally, I think, in England, certainly you're taught to either run away or just ignore it.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. Don't talk about it.
Yeah, an English friend of mine, after I gave a lecture like this, said, Max, I never told you this. He was 62. He said, I had a sister when I was a child. When I was 9 and she was 12, she died. And I love my sister more than anybody in the world. And after the funeral, my British parents, sat me down and said, we will never speak of this again. That was his education on how to deal with grief.
Sounds effective.
Yeah.
If you want to have a panic attack, anyway.
That's right.
So your tips on how to deal with grief, or can you deal with grief?
First of all, it makes a difference if you grieve alone or grieve with others. So when we're grieving, especially bereavement is more specifically if someone dies. But we also grieve, obviously, if there's a romantic breakup, you're in love with someone, they decide to leave you. It's also equally devastating, sometimes more so. So whichever it is, some of the time we do want to spend alone. But some of the time, I think we need to be in the presence of people that care about us. We need to do exactly the opposite of that story that I just told you, where when we're in a crisis, the natural thing for us to do is to cry. It's the first thing we did when we were born, is cry. It's genetically encoded behavior. And when we hear someone cry, what it means is, I'm in trouble, physically or emotionally, I'm in trouble. And the tribe should come to you, not run away from you to leave you alone. So if you're in a crisis and the people you love come to you, and they don't try to comfort you, but they allow you to not be okay, because that's what we need permission for, right? It's like we're all taught, suck it up, a soldier on, cowboy up, whatever it is. No one ever says, it's all right not to be okay. You can completely fall apart. We're not going to think less of you. I'm here. We're not going anywhere. And when you feel that kind of support by your community, you'll go through your grieving process actually quicker than if you try to suck it up, push it down, drink alcohol, pretend it's not happening, and hold it in your body for the next 30 years, which is what happens generally.
I think a lot of it is the expectations of the people around you, because basically those people want to essentially stop, if they want to, either they want to deny it or they basically want to kind of solve it for you, in the quickest way possible, essentially because they don't want to be made feel bad or uncomfortable by your grief.
Precisely.
So
that's the lack of a handbook I was telling you about, because we don't know what to say or how to say it. We just feel awkward about the whole thing. Yeah.
But I mean, I've have some background in this. But it makes you feel a lot worse. It makes you, because you're then having to pretend, you're feeling awful, but then you're having to pretend a certain way because you're worried about upsetting those people that supposedly, probably do care for you, right? And also at a certain point, well, they'll stop being there for you, essentially, if you don't play the game that they in the way that they want you to play it.
We're afraid we'll be shunned, we'll be left behind if we allow them to see us broken. But the thing is, and if your listeners learn anything from my talk today, is the next time you go see someone that's suffering emotionally, I want to tell you that you don't have to say anything spiritual or make them laugh or try to make them feel better. Just like if, let's say you broke your leg, and last night you had surgery on the leg. It was a pretty bad break. And now you're in the hospital today. You're in pain. You're going to be in the hospital a few days, right? And let's say your best friend comes to visit you. You're really happy to see your best friend. There he is, shows up the first day with a big smile. So you don't expect your friend to heal your leg, and you don't expect your friend to take the pain away. But are you happy to see your friend? Yes, you are, very much. And it's the same with a broken heart. Our broken-hearted friend doesn't expect us to heal them or take the pain away. But it means the world that we're with them, that we surround them. It's like the military has this nobody left behind policy, but civilian life doesn't. And it should. And so that story, if you keep in mind, I'm saying this to your listeners, all you have to do is show up. Don't underestimate your presence.
Yeah.
And let them talk. Don't change the subject. Don't try to make them laugh. Later, like, a month from now, you can try to make them laugh. But when they're in the midst of the big grief, let them have their feelings. Give them permission to have their feelings and just be with them. And they'll never forget you for that. You'll be a closer friend because of that. And don't be afraid of tears.
I think a lot of things are complicated where they don't need to be. I mean, people really just need to be heard. And, when you're heard and when it's out there, then some kind of resolution could be made beyond the thinking mind, because you can never solve it from your mind. You can never solve grief from your mind and the loss of people and the loss of things that you've loved,
No, you cannot solve it from your mind. That's exactly correct. And it's a natural process. It's a genetically encoded process, grieving. We didn't invent it. And it doesn't mean we're weak. If you lose someone that you love, it's actually a sign of love that you grieve.
Have you just shifted from yoga, or does this relate to your picture of yoga? Or what does yoga mean for you now in terms of this?
I would say that I've basically created, in a sense, my own idiom, my own methodology, which includes yoga, my own modified yoga, which also includes qigong and also includes some of the therapy and things I've invented along the way. Even some of the breathing exercises I have people do are modifications or inventions of my own. And so I don't really call myself a yoga teacher, and I don't say what I do is yoga. But anybody who practices yoga, if you came to one of my classes, you certainly recognize a substantial amount of it.
Okay, so do you have an aim? Like,
my aim is,
yoga has an aim.
My aim is to help relieve the suffering of the world. And my way of doing that is to help people understand that you don't have to live with anxiety and panic attacks anymore, that they're solvable fairly quickly. Breathing exercises are one of the components, but also understanding that there's a cause to anxiety. That's why it's called post-traumatic. It means it's something that happened in the past. And it's probably something you haven't completely dealt with. And if you can allow yourself to process the emotions that come up and the memories, and let more memories come up, you can actually process the event that happened that traumatized you so that it comes to a conclusion, I call it a reconciliation. Reconciliation is not exactly healing. Healing is not exactly reconciliation. For example, if a parent loses their 5-year-old child, they never completely get over it. But they shouldn't be waking up in panic attacks every night either. So I take people like that who are waking up in panic attacks every night and help them so that they don't, they can sleep. They feel inspired to live again. But yeah, once in a while they're going to cry over the loss of their child, for sure. But I know
you love that word, and it is a good term.
Reconciliation.
Yeah, it is a good term. Yeah, well picked.
I work with people who, for example, wake up 4 or 5 times a night in a panic attack. Can you imagine waking up from sleep in a panic attack several times a night, every night for years? And it didn't take long working with this lady for her to change that. Now she sleeps about 6 hours a night. And can
you give I'm kind of intrigued now without quickly ripping off all your tricks. How do you do that? I mean, what, like, practically speaking, like, can you give examples of how you would take someone from that state to, with a breathing technique? What is the breathing you're doing here?
It's not just breathing, but the breathing.
Right.
So many people are shut down, and I used to be one of them. Shut down. You can't even feel some of your feelings. You're numb because you pack them down so tight and put armor on. So the first thing is to get the armor off and open the door to your subconscious, basically. And that's what the breathing practices do. Secondly, you do other breathing practices every day so you don't accumulate new anxiety. But then the other steps, and this is what my new book is about, which I'm in the midst of writing right now, is going back to the origin, to your origin story of the trauma or traumas that cause you to have anxiety, and reconcile with those events through talk therapy and through other techniques that I teach people. Oftentimes, they just need to understand. They don't even know why they have panic attacks. And it's so interesting because I do one-on-one sessions. I do them online now, obviously, because of COVID. And quite often, if I say to somebody, if I say, Adam, when did your panic attack start? And well, I won't use your name because I don't have any idea if you got panic attacks. I'll say, John, when did your panic attack start? And John says, I don't know, a few years ago. This is the type of answers I get. But finally, I just push and push till they say, okay, it was 6 years ago. Okay,
right.
What happened 6 years ago? Let's talk about that. And once they realize how much they're carrying from that event, it really helps them to start thinking about it differently. And you know what's so interesting is this. Let's say you had a trauma when you were 6 years old. Every time you remember that trauma, you remember it as a 6-year-old. You got a 6-year-old mind, a 6-year-old infrastructure, 6-year-old psychology.
Yeah.
So let's say it was me, and I'm now 64. So every time I'm remembering as a 5-year-old. I'm reacting as a 5-year-old, but I'm not 5. So what I teach people to do is go back at your age now to that event through various techniques I use, and look at it, and look at the adults around and see what they were doing, what they weren't doing, and process it through your adult mind and psychology now. And it's kind of mind-blowing because you realize, that's why my parents were getting divorced. So that's why they were doing it. That's why I got That's why whatever it was. And you can process it completely differently. So we do inner child work as well, where your inner adult meets your inner child, and your inner adult takes over. Your inner adult, what I mean by that is that child's not left on its own anymore. Your inner adult adopts that child and looks after them from now on and makes up for what they lacked. So, for example, if the child wasn't well loved or protected, you promise the child that you will protect them and you will love them from now on. And you hold them in your imagination. And you say, I will never let you go. I will never let anything happen to you. And I know some people hearing that just sounds, that sounds crazy, or that sounds...
No, it's reasonable. I think so many people just haven't had the time and space to ever actually go back and consider the traumas they've had. I mean, I certainly that was the case for me before I did any counseling or anything like any talking therapy. I never even gave it a thought, and I don't imagine there's hardly any, it's not correct grammar, but I imagine there's hardly no people on this listening to this that haven't had some reasonable quantity of trauma in their life,
Almost
and to
everybody.
go back and yeah.
And here's the thing. I'm getting more and more psychologists coming to my workshops, and therapists and psychiatrists and other doctors. And a lot of the therapists are starting to use some of my breathing techniques, even just one of them at the beginning of the sessions with the clients. And what they say is that it works so well. I've had one say, I will never do a session again without having them breathe first, because I can get them in there. I can get them to contact their feelings right away. And so then the talk therapy is much more beneficial and faster. So instead of taking a year to get to John's feelings, I can get there today in one session.
What about people? I mean, going back again, different techniques for different things. So how many breathing patterns do you have? How many different types of breath do you have?
God, I don't know. That's a really good question. I haven't counted them.
Yeah, because people are going to be thinking, like I am, like, well, this sounds incredible. Like, but what actually, without, coming to a session of yours, what, we're pitching your session, right? Like, what are you going to teach? I mean, it sounds.
Well, it depends. If it was a group session, I would lead you through about 20 minutes of standing Qigong type breathing movement patterns that I teach, all with ocean breathing with the exception of one. So, longer exhales, So it's not just ocean breathing, ujjayi
So
breathing.
this is for anxiety.
Yeah, this is to calm the nervous system, which also calms anxiety, which also helps you sleep better. They're all the same problem, basically. And then, of course, if I wanted us to go inward more deeply, then I would do a very simple seated breathing exercise followed by a stronger seated breathing exercise. And at the end of those, you'd feel very different.
On the most basic level, if someone's trying to calm themselves down, a longer exhale breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what if someone's depressed? What would you do there? What's the breath count then? What's the difference?
The hardest thing about working with people who are depressed are to get them to do anything, because quite often they have given up hope and they're suffering from entropy, and getting them to take any action is difficult. Sometimes also people who say they're depressed aren't depressed, they're grieving, and they're not the same thing, but they can look very similar, because both similarly you don't want to do anything, you're antisocial, you stop taking care of yourself, sleep long hours, things like that. But sometimes people say they're depressed, but they're actually in deep grief. Some people have anxiety and depression, so it depends on which one they have. But sometimes you try to get someone who's just depressed to do something, they get angry with you. And then you think, there it is, there's some energy. So you weren't willing to go out and take a walk because you didn't have the energy, but you're willing to yell at me now for trying to get me to take a walk. It's very interesting. So a lot of times people who are depressed are actually quite angry, and they turn the anger in on themselves.
Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah. It strikes me that one get completely apropos of nothing here, really. Nothing to do with anything that I rehearsed as an interview questions, as generally it isn't rehearsed, as you might have noticed. You're just this quality of steadiness that you have. And as we talked before, a sense of allowing and space and presence that I get from me, even online, and I was trying to struggle with the American psychologist in the 1950s, someone Carlos, who said the only thing he wrote a lot about psychology. He's a famous professor at, psychology. What's his name? And in the end, he kind of said, well, the only thing I can really do for someone is kind of radical empathy. I can kind of be there and be with them in that feeling,
It's a kind of intimacy. And when I say intimacy, obviously I'm not talking now about sexual intimacy. I'm just talking about a deep connection or association where you allow yourself to sit with someone and be fully present for them and not afraid of their feelings.
Yeah. It's just, it's a quality beyond what, I don't know. It's the teaching and the method and the breath, but it also, it's deeper than that, I feel. It's the quality of the intonation of your voice, which is very reasonable and very moderated, and, and a whole bunch of things that are probably coming through that, right? And to that end, can you teach this can someone learn breathing online now if they're in, a lockdown situation? Is that possible to learn this?
Yeah, we're doing starting tomorrow, actually, we're doing a 3-day Breathe to Heal event. I call them Breathe to Heal. And it's 15 hours. And it does work pretty well online, not quite as powerful as in person, but people connect really well together. It becomes a small community after we finish. So it can be done. But I think we really need to, there are several lessons that need to be learned, and breathing is one.
Right.
So how to be with each other, talk to each other, comfort each other, and trust each other, to create a culture of trust. Again, like the military does, where if I have a crisis, I'm not going to keep it from my friend because I don't want to worry them or make them awkward. I'll actually tell them, and they'll actually come. For example, let's see, how many years ago? It was about 4 years ago. I had a mild heart attack. It was called a genetic anomaly. It was one of my small arteries, not one of the big ones. And the cardiologist said, your arteries this is afterward when they're looking at them on the scope, and they put a stent in me in the artery. Your arteries aren't particularly blocked. They're, for someone your age, they're actually quite open. Just that one. So we call that a genetic anomaly. And both my grandfathers died at around that age of a heart attack. So probably hereditary. They're probably right. But still, at the time when it's happening, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know whether you're going to be dead in a few minutes or when you have the heart attack, or you're going to be dragging around an oxygen tank behind you the rest of your life, or they're going to saw you open in a little while. You don't know. So it's an impactful experience.
And you knew at the time that's what was happening.
Yeah, it's very obvious. It's right. There was nothing ambiguous about it when you have a heart attack. So my point of the story is, I woke up the next morning in my hospital room after they had put the stent in, and people that I know and love started showing up. And I didn't call anybody. The only person I'd called was my manager to let her know, basically, that I might be dead tomorrow. But that's why I called her. I'm going to the hospital. I'm having a heart attack. And she told just a couple of people. And the next morning, people started showing up in my hospital room. And I can't tell you how deeply affected I was by that. One woman said, I got childcare immediately and drove 3 hours to be here. And I didn't know some of these people loved me so much. I felt so loved and looked after. And here's an important thing. I don't remember what anybody said. It doesn't matter what they said. It matters that they came, and they came immediately. And then the phone calls started coming in. I will never forget those people who showed up that morning, ever, because it meant to me that even if you're broken, which I thought I still was, we still love you. Maybe we love you even more. We're with you. We're not going to let something like our heart attack push us away. We're here. And that is so healing, and it makes you want to get well. And it makes you feel like you belong, as opposed to, now I have no value because I had a heart attack. Now I have no value because a woman has a mastectomy. Now I have no value because I have prostate cancer, the common things people are experiencing. Or my wife left me, or my husband left me, or my child died. All these tragedies that people go through in their life. And when they realize that their community is there 100% for them, it's the difference between being traumatized by it or simply it being a very difficult event that you go through, come out the other side with an even stronger community than you had a few days ago. So I think it's partly a social phenomenon we're dealing with. The way we communicate and interact with each other. And it's not so difficult to learn these things. It's actually quite simple.
You don't want to run for government or something like that. It seems like you could be, you could be of use in that sphere, really, with this, because you're looking for social change, not just individual change, but the kind of whole structure of how we're dealing with each other, in a very kind of very generalized way.
But I want it to be outside of politics. I want us to just culturally change. People didn't start practicing yoga in the 90s because it was mandated by the government. It was a natural phenomenon that occurred, and that's how I want to work. I don't want to work within the government. It's too crazy now. Politics is just a dog fight now. Just two dogs trying to rip each other's throat out. I don't want to get in the middle of that.
No. I always get into this question at the end. What else do you like to do outside breathing yoga and helping people grieve? How do you enjoy yourself?
I'm a musician. I've been
you're still playing.
In my early life, I had a couple of records out, and I still like to play my guitar and play piano. There's a piano here where I live, and I still like to write songs. I wrote a few songs last year. I don't release them. I don't want to be a public performer. I just love writing music and recording it. It's what I enjoy doing, but I'm not trying to make myself a performer.
Should have asked you to do one.
I wouldn't have done it.
It's a missed opportunity. Because you said you sung as well, right? You were the lead singer of a rock band, right?
Yes, that's right. I sing, and I do overtoning in my practice also as a breathing technique.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put you on the spot unless you were fancying just letting it out now.
Well, I'd be happy to do an overtone, but I don't think it comes through Zoom so well.
No, probably right. We'll let you off.
It's just sound like some sort of space ray gun sort of sound.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing. So I usually ask, what's a guilty pleasure and what's an inspiration? So something just off the top of your head, what's something that inspires you, book, a person, a place, and something that, I should be guilty about it, but, just some of the people like chocolate. I mean, chocolate's a bit boring. Don't say chocolate. Everyone says chocolate.
I won't say chocolate, although I like chocolate. To me, chocolate's a gateway drug. It just gets me. If I start eating chocolate, all sweet.
Just from the past of mainlining heroin.
I guess a guilty pleasure would have to be food, though. I would have to be pastry, pie. I love those. Sometimes I eat those. Feel really good about it, and a little bit guilty as well. In terms of inspiration and so on, I love reading and listening to people who are kind and who advocate that we are kind to each other and that we open the heart, that we solve our problems outside of politics, because politics is so violent, hostile, and binary. I love it when people like...
who do you like on that sphere?
Like Malala Yousafzai, who's now maybe 20 years old and who was 15 years old when she first spoke to the United Nations. Malala Yousafzai comes out and finds her voice and speaks to adults, and the audience has tears streaming down their face because she's learned the language of the heart. And to me, this is something to aspire to, that I'm inspired by, is when I see speakers or hear speakers who can speak in a way that go right into the heart. And it's partly the words and it's partly not the words. For example, if you read Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, it's inspiring. If you hear him and see him do it, it's 10 times more inspiring. There's something about the words being carried by the voice and the voice coming from...
Yeah, exactly. And I very much feel that is the case with you, I have to say. So thank you for your time, and for this wonderful interview. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It's good to speak with you. We'll talk again. Huh?
I hope so. Thanks.